I feel horrible for the people. I feel horrible that we have to live like this. I feel horrible that we are even seeing this. We don't even deserve this. Kids maybe died in here. Kids maybe died in other places, but we don't deserve this.
The civilian death toll in Gaza is still rising amid the worst flare-up of Israeli-Palestinian violence in 7 years. Since last week, nearly 200 Palestinians have died, almost half of them women and children. In Israel overnight, where 11 people have died, Hamas militants launched rockets at southern cities. While in Gaza, Israel launched dozens of airstrikes, flattening this 12-story building that housed foreign media offices, including the Associated Press and Al Jazeera. Israel says the target was an alleged Hamas intelligence base inside. No deaths have been reported from that collapse. All of it, and now congressional calls for a ceasefire, are intensifying the pressure on President Biden to take more action to help stop the violence. Joining us now from Tel Aviv, my colleague Richard Engel, NBC News chief foreign correspondent, and my colleague NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee. Carol Lee, I know you have breaking news, a readout on the president's efforts in this area. Tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, that's right, Nicole. The president, who had said earlier today that he did intend to speak with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They've had several calls now in recent days. The White House just issued a readout of that phone call, and they said, among other things, that the president expressed support for a ceasefire and discussed U.S. engagement with Egypt and other partners toward that end. The two leaders also agreed to stay in close touch. Now, what's interesting about that is the White House has been saying for several days now that they just want to de-escalate the violence, bring an end to this conflict, and that they're interested in what a White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, today called quiet, intensive diplomacy. So really behind the scenes rather than being very full-throated in demanding some sort of ceasefire agreement here. But here we have the president speaking with the prime minister, and then the White House saying that as part of that conversation, he expressed some support for a ceasefire, Nicole.
Yeah, Richard, to Carol's point, I have that quote she's talking about. This was Jen Psaki just earlier today. Our calculation at this point is that having those conversations behind the scenes is the most constructive approach. What changed?
Well, I'm not sure if anything has changed. Here in Israel, the Prime Minister Netanyahu just issued a statement not long ago saying that he had met with his security cabinet. He'd met with the heads of all the security agencies, including the Shin Bet and the Mossad, and that he had given the order for this operation to continue. He said that there are still more targets to hit and that Israel is doing well, that it killed a top operative from Islamic Jihad, which is a rival organization to Hamas that also operates in the Gaza Strip. It hit a naval asset. This has been described as some sort of drone submersible that Hamas was using, and very much gave the impression from this statement that Israel is going to proceed with this military operation until it decides not to proceed any longer. Now, how much longer that is, we don't know. But as of tonight, it's still on.
And Richard Engel, can you tell us what is expected then in the coming days if nothing is going to change on the part of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Oh, I don't think we need to wait days. It's happening right now. Usually around this time is when things start to happen. The Israeli airstrikes, usually in the very dark hours, small hours of the day, in the overnight time, for the last 7 days in a row, have been pounding many different areas in the Gaza Strip. Each day, the targets have been slightly different. Over the last couple of days, they've been focused mostly on what Israel describes as the tunnel network. It also is calling it now the Metro, a series of underground tunnels that Israel has mapped out using various imagery techniques that it says allow Hamas to move themselves and move weapons undetected, because if they moved on the surface, they would be easy to pick off. But Israel has also targeted buildings inside Gaza City itself, which is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. And when it has done that, there have been very significant numbers of casualties, like in these 3 apartment buildings that collapsed over this weekend, which counted for many of the women and children who have been killed so far.
Carol Lee, Secretary of State Tony Blinken said this. He criticized Hamas for indiscriminate rocket fire, but called on the Israeli government to do everything possible to avoid more civilian casualties. Senator Chris Murphy went farther than that on Morning Joe with our colleagues this morning. Let me show you that.
We do have leverage with the Israelis. We are an important security partner with them. The defensive mechanism, which stops many of these rockets from hitting Israel, is made possible by U.S. taxpayer funding. The aid that comes into Palestinian territories is made possible by U.S. taxpayer funding. So let's use a little bit heavier hand right now to tell both sides that now is the time to stand down.
Carol, does this sort of urging, or I don't know what to call it. I haven't been in the White House. It's sort of like people on the sidelines, but that's an important ally, an important U.S. senator, telling them to use a heavier hand to call on both sides to stand down. Are they hearing that inside the White House? Are they concerned about that? Are they working the phones with their own allies in the Democratic Party?
Well, look, Nicole, one of the things that's been really interesting about this dynamic and the way President Biden has positioned himself is that exactly what you're raising, which is that you see members of his own party, the politics there, the views there shifting a little bit. And the president seems more in line with Republicans who have not criticized him to the same extent or said that he needs to be more forceful in this. The White House obviously is mindful. They're aware that there's this drumbeat within the president's own party for him to take a tougher stance on Israel. But so far, we haven't seen the president really lean into that. He has said, as you noted, echoed Anthony Blinken saying that Israel has a right to defend itself, that Israel, while the United States wants them to minimize civilian casualties and do all they can, they haven't come out and really condemned what we've seen so far. In fact, the president was asked whether or not there was a proportionate, Israel's responses were proportionate, and he didn't answer that question, and so was the press secretary, and she didn't either. So they're really trying to walk this fine line and this balance and try to do this diplomacy behind the scenes and see if it can bear fruit. The question is, how long do they play that game, and how long does this continue before they start to get a little more forceful?
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.